Hello, I'm David Breeden. I'm the Senior Minister at First Unitarian Society in Minneapolis. I want to talk a little bit today about the idea behind religion and think a little bit about what religion really means. One of the perks of my office is that I get to meet with a lot of different religious leaders in the downtown Minneapolis area. I was at a retreat just a few weekends ago with a group, and I was talking with one of the imams. Now, a imam, of course, is a leader of Muslims. He's Islamic. And we were talking about what is the essence of all religions. And the imam said that the Prophet Muhammad once said that all religion could be boiled down to one word. And that one word is relationship. Relationship. Now, I think that's an important idea for what religion is really all about. Can we have a private religion, for example? Well, we can certainly have a personal one in our minds, but that's just in our heads, isn't it? It's kind of like being locked up in a cellar somewhere. Most religions through human history have been about the social experience, the experience of gathering into some kind of congregation, we might call it, some kind of social group in order to interact. And these interactions can help us, well, one, to get outside of ourselves and to try to help other human beings, but also to work on our own thoughts and feelings, what it means to be human. Why is that? Why do we do that? One of the more interesting things that's been happening in recent years is the explosion in our understanding of the human brain through neuroscience and also through anthropology, especially the work with primates. And I do want to show you a book. This book came out recently. It's Franz de Waal, and he's an anthropologist, and it's called The Bonobo and the Atheist, in Search of Humanism Among the Primates. The Bonobo and the Atheist, in Search of Humanism Among the Primates. Now, one of the more interesting things, again, in terms of anthropology and primate study, is that until fairly recently, we didn't know that there was a difference between these animals called bonobos and these animals called chimpanzees. Chimpanzees we know from television. They're the cute little fellows that go running around and the comic relief, right? Well, not really. Those are always just baby chimpanzees, and when chimpanzees get a little bit bigger, they're much stronger than a human being, and they are not very nice creatures. As a matter of fact, they have a cruel streak to them. Then, after we began to look closely at chimpanzees, we discovered that, lo and behold, there was this other group that is genetically very closely related to chimpanzee, but it is a separate species called the bonobo. And the bonobo is not in any way violent. And this became very interesting to primatologists who began to look at it. After this research and this realization, then, other anthropologists and then biologists and neuroscientists began to look at other species and how animals within the same groups can develop very, very different attitudes or abilities to do violence to each other or to share. For example, there are several kinds of voles, V-O-L-E-S, voles. It's a small little rodent. The prairie vole, for example, is an animal that mates for life. Two voles will get together and have children, and they like each other better than any other voles. Also, the male of the species helps take care of the baby voles and will protect them and bring food. Well, that's interesting, except that montane voles, which are exactly the same animal, just in a different geographic area, does nothing of the sort. The male disappears, never comes back. The mother nurses the baby voles in a much shorter time period, and there is absolutely no relationships among them. Now, how can that be that it's the same physical structure, the same brains, but they act in totally different ways? And that's the interesting question that's going on. And neuroscience is discovering that the same brain can develop different receptors for different brain chemicals that then make the animals act in different ways. This is probably also true of the bonobo and the chimpanzee, very closely related, but they act very, very differently. The bonobo evolved in an area of Africa where food was not an issue. They didn't have to fight about food. They were able to share, and so they developed very, very different kinds of social interactions among each other. Well, now, what in the heck does that have to do with humanity? Well, the answer is that we human beings also react to our brain chemistry. We also evolved to be sharing animals. And when we do share, when we nurture our young, when we take care of relatives, friends, etc., brain chemicals are then released that make us feel good, feel safe, feel protected, and that's a reward system that then is able to keep family units and tribal units, etc., working. Now, what does that mean for nowadays? Because heck, most of us don't live in tribes anymore. Well, the fact is that for most of human history, we did live in tribal units, and therefore our evolutionary wiring is related toward those ideas of being social creatures and sharing with each other. Now, you probably have figured out where I'm going with that in terms of religious groups, in terms of congregations, that one way we human beings can continue those good feelings, those social relationships with each other is to, nowadays, when we live in these nuclear homes, to get out, leave those apartments and go out to a religious institution, Sunday morning, Friday evening, whatever, and get together with other human beings to share our thinking, to share our problems, and to find common solutions and work on social justice issues, etc. So that's what I find very, very interesting about this new anthropology and neuroscience work. It's showing us for the first time how our brains actually evolved in such a way that to make us social creatures. Fascinating work. Also that if we remove one brain chemical, for example, we may operate in a totally different way. For example, those little prairie voles that mate for life, if you shut down the dopamine receptors in their mind, the dopamine being a chemical in the brain, if they don't have that, they can't mate for life because they can't recognize each other. And so it totally messes up the social structure of the prairie vole. Again, a chemical that makes for the behavior of the animal. And after all, we human beings are just animals. Okay, well, so what about, I have a soul, I have a heart, I have a mind. Well, neuroscience also tells us that those features that we have over many hundreds, if not thousands of years, come to call the heart, I feel it in my heart, or I'm thinking this in my mind, or the soul is eternal. All of those functions that we talk about are actually brain functions. As a matter of fact, they're probably what's known as reptilian brain functions, limbic system brain functions, that is the older parts of our brains that evolved much, much earlier in time than those more social frontal lobes in our brain. So that's why we feel it in our gut. Actually, we're feeling it in the limbic system of our brain, that is, we're feeling it in the reptilian brain that developed very early in our evolutionary process. So interestingly enough, we are beginning in science to discover those things that make us moral creatures, ethical creatures, and that drive our religious impulses. Now, one of the things that I try to look for as a humanist and a free thinker is how can you have those structures that we human beings have evolved in and feel safe and comfortable in? How can we have those structures without what I call snake oil? That is, the superstitions that have also built up around religious thinking in many of the world's religions. So how can we have a religion without the snake oil? Right? Well, it's according to how you define religion, first off. I tend to say that religion is about aligning our aspirations, how we want to be good, with our actual actions. So this is how I feel today. I feel bad and grouchy, but I really want to be a good person. How do I align those values? And that is through some kind of religious belief system or some kind of religious practice that we do that. And can we do that without the snake oil, that is, the superstitions that build up in religion? Now, I should mention the interesting history of snake oil. It has come to be a term that we use to denigrate something, to say it's a flim-flam or some kind of rip-off. Snake oil was actually in a medication used by Chinese workers in the 19th century when they were brought over to the United States to work on the railroads. They were out there working hard, sledgehammers, carrying heavy things, and so they were sore. They were often cut themselves, hurt themselves in various ways. And they used a medication from their homeland that had snake oil in it, and Euro-Americans began to see that this stuff really worked. Wow, put the snake oil on it, your wound doesn't get infected, it takes the soreness out of the muscles. It's a cure-all. So Americans began to want to buy this medication that had snake oil in it. Well, one of the problems with that little scenario was, however, that the kind of Chinese water snake that was used in the snake oil medications the Chinese workers used is not a snake that exists in North America. So the medication the Chinese were using, they were getting from China, and it could not be manufactured in the same way in the United States. So what did American entrepreneurs begin to do? Well, they lied about it. They began to sell snake oil ointments that had no snake oil in them. That was completely legal in the late 19th century, but with the turn of the 20th century, there was a Food and Drug Administration Act that worked on truth in advertising. At that point, someone said, well, what's actually in snake oil? Let's tell the truth about that. When the chemists looked at the snake oil being sold to Americans, they discovered a very unfortunate thing, which is that there was no snake oil in it. There was a little bit of cow oil in the snake oil medications, and so they had to stop selling them that way. And it became the touchstone of something that's being sold. It's not being truthful about what's really in it. Now, I go on about that a little bit to tell you that story because my question is, what if we had a Truth in Advertising Act in terms of religions? If we had to label what is really in most of the religions in the world, would there be any snake oil in them? Would it mostly be sacred cow oil, for example? I think is a good question. How much of it is the truth and how much is superstition? It's a very difficult question, and of course I'm not one of those who say that all religions are just snake oil. I don't believe that is the case at all. I think that religions are very good for humanity in many ways, but I do believe in examining the ideas that we choose to believe or try to force ourselves to believe, as the case may be. And unfortunately, I'm afraid that many of religious beliefs can't be in any way demonstrated to be true. They are not really snake oil, or as the term has come to be, they are snake oil, meaning they aren't really true. Now, an anthropologist by the name of Pascal Boyer, B-O-Y-E-R, is a professor who studies religions. He has studied religions in many parts of the world, and one of his main points is that you can't have a religion without what he calls an ontological impossibility. An ontological impossibility. Now, what does he mean by that? Well, an ontological impossibility is something that cannot be true. Cannot be true. So what Professor Boyer is saying is that you cannot have a religion without something in it that is beyond belief, so far beyond belief that actually it's completely absurd. Take, for example, a sacred tree, and this is one of his arguments. I may believe that there is a particular tree that I can walk up to, and if I walk up to it and say the proper things or make the proper offering to it, that then that tree will hear me and give me what I have asked for. Let's say maybe that the tree is inhabited by a fairy or a spirit of some sort. That is an ontological impossibility. Trees don't hear because trees don't have ears. The whole idea of hearing and trees are ontologically impossible. It can't happen. A tree can certainly vibrate with sounds, but it's not going to hear. It doesn't have ears, and even it would never hear what we were trying to say. It doesn't know English, etc. So that's an ontological impossibility. Boyer says all religions are like that. He goes on to build his argument that let's say that I pray to a particular icon that is a statue. Now, why would I go to a particular icon to pray to that icon if I believe that the God that I am trying to affect by praying to that icon can hear and see and know everything? Why would I go to a particular place to reach a deity that knows everything everywhere all the time? Well, I have fallen into the trap of an ontological impossibility. I believe two different things at the same time, neither of which may be true in reality. So that is Boyer's argument in a nutshell, that we have to have these ontological impossibilities. Well, there's no doubt that that adds magic, if you will, to religions, the supernatural element to religions. But I think that Professor Boyer is incorrect about the whole idea of ontological impossibility. The reason I think that's true is that we have the example of many religious traditions that don't have any kind of supernatural element built into them. Probably the oldest is Taoism. It's usually in English spelled with a T, T-A-O, Tao, although it's a problem with how do we transliterate the Chinese language. Taoism is the oldest continuously practiced religion in the world. The reason for that's fairly simple. It comes from the area that has the longest continuous human writing and culture in the world, that is China. Taoism is apparently goes all the way back to a prehistoric shamanistic belief system in which the world was essentially alive with magic and could be affected in some way by human action. Now, that's where Taoism came from, and there are still in existence today in Asia Taoists who believe in what we in the Western world would call fairies, for example, or spirits, and that they can affect these and pray to these. But there's another strain of Taoism that is completely rational in its approach and has no reference to deity whatsoever. That Taoism, I would argue, is also a religion. This is also true of some forms of Buddhism. Some forms of Buddhism make no claims to supernaturality whatsoever. Also, interestingly enough, about 5,000 years ago, in Hindu tradition, the Karvakas developed, and that was a subgroup of Hinduism that were atheist in their practice. They did not believe in any of the supernatural elements of Hinduism, although they continued to practice the rites within the Hindu religious tradition. Interesting, isn't it? So all the way back, they were able to do that. So these are arguments against Professor Boyer's idea that there has to be some kind of supernatural element in religion. Well, why am I trying to go there? Well, that's because as a humanist, I'm not sure there is any supernatural anything out there. And for me, however, religion is still a very important thing because, back to anthropology and neuroscience, I think that religion functions as something that we developed and evolved to practice in such a way that we feel better and act better in groups. So I believe that there can be a religion without the snake oil, in other words. Now, it's something to think about because this is an active religious debate, and certainly a scholar's debate about how or what can be done with that kind of idea. But if you stop to think about it, it really gets down to a lot of the poetry of our world, that we can still have love and connection even no matter what we believe, I want to share with you a moment, four little lines from the great poet E. E. Cummings. Love is the voice under all silences, the hope which has no opposite in fear, the strength so strong mere force is feebleness, the truth more first than sun, more last than star. I'll read that one more time. Love is the voice under all silences, the hope which has no opposite in fear, the strength so strong mere force is feebleness, the truth more first than sun, more last than star. That kind of love comes from relationship, I would argue. And that's what the ideal of getting into a religious frame of mind and into a religious group can give us. That is, that love that goes beyond. After all, we human beings have a common lot no matter what kind of religion we believe in. My Muslim friends believe, of course, that there is a huge, powerful God who will correct all things and makes the world operate according to rules and regulations that maybe we can't see, we can't understand, but someday we will understand them, at least when we exit this particular realm and go into some kind of afterlife in another world. But even though they believe that, they still suffer the basic realities of human existence. The same realities that an atheist goes through, the same realities that an agnostic, that is someone not quite sure whether God exists or not, the same sufferings and trials and tribulations that a Christian goes through on this planet in one's lifetime. So no matter what you believe about an afterlife or about some kind of deity in charge, in other words, you go through the very same sorts of experiences. So what we have in common is our humanness, the fact that all of us are suffering under the same conditions and enjoying the same things on earth. I'm not a pessimist. So we get things on the earth as well. We get youth and we get physical vitality. We get to eat wonderful food. We have great relationships, etc. We also, however, suffer loss. And the interesting thing about we human beings is that we don't notice the good things we get very often. We aren't grateful a lot of the time. And that's another thing religion can remind us to do. But we sure do notice when something gets taken away. When the love of our lives dies or leaves us. When a loved one dies or becomes ill. When we lose a job. When we don't quite do as well as we thought we would in a race or a test, or All of these things are hurtful to us because we lose something, our self-respect, a loved one, etc. So life is about loss and loss and loss. And even if we're the luckiest person alive, and even if we are the richest person alive, sooner or later we do lose everything. That is, we go into death and disappear. And again, you can believe in an afterlife, but we know that that end is not very pretty on this earth. And so we don't want to go there. So life is about loss for everyone, for everyone. So we have this common humanity that we can share, and even though I don't believe what this person over here says, or this person doesn't believe my crazy science about chimpanzees, whatever, we still have this common humanness that we can share and talk about. And that's one of the things that humanist congregations and Unitarian Universalist congregations, I think, do fairly well. That is, that we take people who believe very different things. Atheists, Christians, theists, agnostics, and we all come together to agree on one thing, and that is that we will be in relationship with each other, even though we don't necessarily believe in each other's belief systems. So when we do that, we are able to get those brain chemicals going that we found out that the bonobo needs and those prairie voles need, and we all need. We get those chemicals flowing in our systems. We get those rewards of being with each other in relationship, and we feel better about it. And also we can share our losses. We have someone to talk to about the loss of a loved one. We have someone to talk to about the loss of our health. Maybe we even have someone to talk to who maybe had that operation that we're looking at, or was able to make it through that disease that scares us a great deal. By sharing those human burdens, we are therefore lighten them. And that, I believe, is the essence of religion. I agree with the Prophet Muhammad. Religion is about relationship. It's just that I go about it from a slightly different way as a humanist, in that I think that the relationships that we humans have are based in our evolution and in our brain chemistry, and I don't believe in things like mind or soul or spirit. But it doesn't matter. The fact is, the same brain chemicals flow, the same facts happen to all of us human beings, and the love that we can express to our fellow human beings remains the same as we work in some kind of relationship. I'll read E. E. Cummings one more time. Love is the voice of all silences. We can stay silent in love. The hope which has no opposite in fear. The strength so strong, mere force is feebleness. The truth more first than sun, more last than star. We can find that kind of love in human relationship, whether we believe in a huge disembodied God such as Allah or the Christian God. And we can also find that kind of love as a pagan. We can also find that kind of love and relationship in humanism and in complete scientific materialism, in believing that, by golly, everything can be or someday will be explained by completely natural explanations. Well, I hope I have in some way pointed out something about how humanism works and how we work to be together in human relationship. I am David Breeden, the senior minister at First Unitarian Society in Minneapolis. We are a congregation that since about 1916 has been a gathering place for atheists and agnostics and Christians, Jews and Muslims, Hindus, and just about everything in between. And we would love to see you.